Hi pals, I hope you're all well. Today I'm going to be talking to you about all the books I read in both June and July. I'm a bit behind with my wrap-up videos. I've got 2 months to wrap up this month, and I have 13 books to talk to you about today, so I'm just going to get right into it and start by talking to you about the first book that I read in June, and that was Symona's Still Single by Lisa Bent. This is one of the Jacaranda 20 in 2020 titles, which, if you don't know, is a initiative just to celebrate the first time that a British publisher has published 20 books by Black British authors. So I really enjoyed this book actually. I listened to an audiobook and it was really, really enjoyable. We follow Symona, who's I think about 38, she's in her late 30s. And she's British Jamaican and she lives in London and she's living this kind of single life, looking for a partner to have children with. It's kind of one of the things that she really wants is to have a child, and we kind of follow her journey. It's very emotional, it's very kind of psychological, exploration of self, there's a little bit of journaling, reflection that goes on. I really, really liked Symona. A lot of some decisions that she made, I'm not sure I would necessarily do myself or necessarily agree with. There is infidelity that happens at one point, really right at the start of the book. That's not a spoiler, but it's very, very interesting to kind of follow her, and I really got quite emotionally attached to her and found myself kind of even now I still remember little details about the story and stuff like that. So it is a romance book, but it's kind of not a traditional romance. It's more about kind of Symona on her own personal journey rather than her in relation to somebody else, if that makes sense, and their relationship. It was more about our central character. I really liked it. I would really recommend it if you like non-traditional romances or you're looking for something a little bit different. Definitely one I would recommend. I then read Rough Music by Patrick Gale, which I liked, but I didn't like it as much or love it as much as I had loved a previous title by Patrick Gale. It still was quite interesting. I think it's the first time, he says in an interview that's in the back of the book, it's the first time that he wrote dual characters and dual narratives, and I think it kind of shows its kind of infancy and youthfulness. But it was interesting to compare this to one of his more later works, which is one I had read previously, and I'm definitely going to read it more from Patrick Gale. I really, really enjoy his writing, the way it's kind of psychological as well, explores the self, explores interpersonal relationships, and the complexities of those. And I really like it. Again, infidelity, actually, just content warnings. I know some people really don't like reading about that, which is why I mentioned it for both. But that's not a spoiler. It's quite early in the book that's kind of talked about. And yeah, really enjoyed it. Really interesting, but not my favourite. I do think if you like kind of slow-paced literary fiction, it's definitely one to check out. I then listened to the audiobook of Beyond Trans by Heath Fogg Davis, which is one that I got via my library, I think. I did enjoy this. It was very interesting, I think, definitely exploring the construct of gender and picking it apart and thinking about how it impacts every aspect of society and how kind of gender coded and gender segregated we are, and just how harmful that is, not just for trans people but for people across different genders, and that pushing people into kind of specific gender stereotypes is really harmful for everyone, and kind of picking that apart and thinking about a different and alternative approach to that. I found it really interesting. It gave me kind of lots of food for thought, and again I would recommend it if you're interested in those topics. It certainly was one that I enjoyed, but probably not a favourite in terms of all-time non-fictions that I've read, because I just felt like it was quite short, and he picked apart 3 or 4 examples, but they were all quite American-centric, so kind of difficult to kind of think of those in different societies. But I think if you are in America, you'll probably get even more from this, because you'll be able to kind of see the examples that they're talking about and kind of understand the intricate details of them a bit more. Understand the intricate details of them a bit more than I was able to, based in Iceland and from the UK. So yeah, definitely quite specific to America, but definitely one that I still found was interesting in a kind of theoretical sense, to pick apart certain structures that may exist across all societies. I then read, which was one of my favourites of the year so far, We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. This is a lovely memoir, really beautifully told, really touching, really moving. I really enjoyed learning about Samra Habib's life, born in Pakistan and immigrated to Canada, and just the kind of experiences of that transition, the impact on her family, and kind of exploring the intersections and the intersectionality between being a Muslim and being queer, and finding community and finding people who they can connect with and she can connect with. So I really enjoyed this. Thought it was really beautifully told. It's quite a short book, but it's one that I still think about. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that one. Another audiobook that I listened to was Being Jazz, My Life as a Transgender Teen by Jennings. I just saw this in my Library Libby app and was curious about it, so started the audiobook. It is quite good. I think this is really good if you have never read anything about or written by transgender people. This is probably quite a good place to start, because what Jennings does really well is kind of introduce it as at quite a basic level, and I find that would be quite helpful for a lot of readers. And my sort of thought on that was that I felt like for me it didn't add much to my kind of understanding of transgender people, of transgender issues. It just kind of contributed, I guess, to a kind of body of somebody else's experience, because I guess when you're reading memoirs you're only getting one story, so it's always good to hear other people's experiences and kind of be able to kind of see the spectrum of experiences of transgender people. So I valued that a lot, and was kind of struck as well by Jennings as a person, because they are like a YouTube star apparently. I'd never heard of them before reading the book, but yeah, she is like quite an interesting character, and I found it interesting to think about being young and being on YouTube at that age. I was never on YouTube at that age. I've literally only started this YouTube channel last year. But yeah, I found it really interesting to think about that and the impact of on your mental health as a young person, experiencing being so online so young, and admired that they felt, and she felt such courage to share so much of her experience as a transgender teen online, making herself quite vulnerable in that way, and thinking about kind of how difficult that must have been and the kind of experiences she must have had, and the whole family kind of experienced it with her. I think she has a TV show in America, but yeah, found it interesting as a memoir and learn about somebody else's experience. I really like memoirs, so can't really go wrong for me. I then read Who Killed My Father by Edouard Louis, translated by Lauren Stein. I really like Edouard Louis' writing. I love how he interrogates structures, and in this book he interrogates the kind of structures which led to his father to live a life of struggle and strife, and being working class in France, and the impact of that, and the fact that it shortens your life expectancy, and the impact in particular on Edouard Louis' family. His dad became unwell and it was linked to his occupation, and the fact that people in working class jobs are more likely to become unwell related to their work, and just really getting inside that structure and kind of interrogating it, but in quite a stylistic, interesting, complex way. I really enjoy Edouard Louis' writing. And yeah, I will read basically everything that he writes. I think History of Violence is still my favourite book that I've read from him, but it's really heavy. Like, if this is heavy, then History of Violence is like, I don't know, twice as heavy. It's really intense, but really enjoyed them both. Think Edouard Louis is definitely somebody who I kind of admire and look at as somebody, I mean, he's about the same age as me, but is so clever, so intelligent, and so critical in a way that I think is really admirable. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this and really anything. If you see anything that Edouard Louis written, I'd recommend giving it a go and see what you think of it. Now for one of the chunkiest graphic novels I think I've ever read, I think this might come in second place to a graphic novel called Uncomfortably Happily that I read last year, I think. But I really enjoyed this. It's called On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. It's a sci-fi female romance story. Two things that I enjoy reading about, and I thought it was really sweet. It's very, very slow paced. It's cozy feeling and sweet, and I would recommend it if you fancy that. And I love when graphic novels are quite chunky because you really get into the story and the characters. And as I say, this one is really quite slow paced. Initially I was thinking, oh my goodness, like speed it up a little bit, but if you like that kind of pace to your graphic fiction, then I would definitely recommend this one. And yeah, nice and easy kind of Sunday reading to lose yourself into. That's how I'd kind of think of this one. I also read a collection of poetry. I read Don't Call Us Dead by Danny A. Smith. I really enjoyed this one. I thought that it was very clever, and the kind of, I'm not very good at talking about poetry, I will say this, but the way that the poems were constructed were really clever. I loved the kind of exploration of being HIV positive and the impact of that, and being queer and black in America. This is one of the ones I just found really moving. It's like my blood, his blood, repeated over and over again, and kind of mingling together. And there's quite a lot of conversations about blood, because obviously it's not a lot of the poems, but some of the poems are about what it means to be HIV positive, and kind of almost the stigmas that are experienced by someone who's HIV positive. I think it was really, really enjoyable as a poetry collection, really kind of interesting, engaging. As I say, I loved the structures and the way that they were played with as well, and different poems had different rhythms, and I like how would you say, like the way they're laid out, different layouts. I don't know I don't know how you talk about poetry. I didn't pay attention to that English class, but I do really, really like this one and would recommend it. If you also like poetry and are interested in those kind of themes, this is one to check out. I then read a collection of essays called Tiny Moons by Mingya Powles, and I really enjoyed this one. It was a contender for my favourites of the year, but I think it's one that it might need to sit with me for a while to see if it really is a favourite. Like sometimes books need a little bit of time to kind of for you to sit with them and kind of experience them more fully. And I feel like this is one of those. It might even be one, I think it's probably going to be one that I reread, because I feel like there was a lot of lovely moments in this, and what I really loved about it was the author's kind of sharing of experience of joyfulness with food. I found that really lovely, just really enjoyed reading it, and yeah, it was just a joy to read from start to finish. Also just loved the kind of exploration of being between two cultures, and what that feels like, how that's experienced, and how you can feel a longing for a home that you maybe either don't know or you're not even sure exists anymore. That's definitely something that I experience as an immigrant myself, because you can kind of long for a place, but you might go back and maybe the place is completely changed, or you go back and you've completely changed, and nothing looks the same anymore, nothing feels the same, and yeah, it's quite a strange experience. So I enjoyed reading about Mingya Powell's experience of that. It was also quite interesting because I didn't fully realise going into this that the author is eating in Shanghai because they're a student, so it's like a kind of different things that they experience as a student abroad. So I wasn't expecting that. I've been a student abroad. I lived in actually, interestingly, I went on Erasmus to Belgium, but I was offered, first of all, an international place at a university in Shanghai. So I think this kind of had a kind of eerie what-if experience about it for me personally as well, which was really interesting, and at times felt like I wonder how I would have coped with those experiences, because the reason I didn't go to Shanghai was, one, that I knew if I flew there, I was there for the full year, I couldn't afford to come back again, and that was quite a daunting thought. And two, I felt like it would be quite a massive culture shock. I had done trips abroad by myself before, but only in Europe, and for kind of like 2-3 weeks at a time. So the idea of going away for a whole year, not being able to come back, not being able to afford to come back, was very scary. And maybe being in a country where you don't know the language, which was the reality for me. So it was really interesting to kind of think about that kind of alternate path that could have been, and see it through this author's eyes. So very interesting, and I'll definitely read more from this author. I think they've got another essay collection out, so I'm hoping to get my mitts on that soon and read that. I would really recommend this though. And then I kind of wanted something like light-hearted, silly, kind of funny, escapist nonsense really, and I definitely got that with The Weight of the Househusband by Kousuke Oono. I hope I'm saying that correct. This is a manga, and it follows a man who was a yakuza, which is like a Japanese gangster, I believe, from what I've read online, and he was called the Immortal Dragon, but he's now a house husband for his wife, and he kind of looks after the household stuff, and it's just like quite silly, like one-liner or like little sketches of this man in his like day-to-day life and how he kind of overreacts or behaves like a yakuza in everyday situations, and it's silly, it's funny, it's just light-hearted fun. So if that's what you're after, I would recommend this. I've saw some reviewers say that they didn't really like the kind of one-liner aspect to it, which is totally fair enough, but it's not a full narrative across the whole manga. It's more like just kind of one-liner chapters or like sketches. I enjoyed it. I thought it was light-hearted, fun, silly, and I would probably read more, but I would wait till my library gets them in. I also read Inlands by Elin, Willows, translated by Duncan J. Lewis. Really enjoyed this one. It's kind of like slice of life, unnamed narrator, kind of, it's not totally dark, but it does have kind of darker moments, and we get these kind of vignettes of like little experiences that she has, and so I should say as well, she moves from Stockholm to like a rural town in the north of Sweden in the Arctic Circle, and it's kind of about her adjustment to life there, the differences in culture, even though it's the same country, the differences in like cultural moments, and like even ways of speaking and stuff. So she says that the people there inhale on yes, which is what they also do in Icelandic. Like, it's like a sort of inhale as you speak sort of thing, and yeah, I find that really interesting because that's also something that I notice here, like people do that inhale, and I also find it quite interesting because there definitely are cultural differences between the city, the capital city, and rural Iceland, and a lot of her descriptions of this rural town that she lived in really reminded me of rural towns I've been to. Also, I read this with one of my Bookstagram friends, and I really enjoyed that experience because we were able to kind of talk about it a lot and like discuss certain moments, and I really feel like this would be a good one for a book club or something because there was a lot to discuss and like unpick. Yeah, it's definitely one if you like literary fiction, especially literary fiction with a little bit of dark themes, not like loads, but a little bit of undercurrent of some darkness in it, and I really liked it. I felt like really connected to our narrator and really enjoyed the exploration of cultural shock and cultural difference. We always think of cultural shock as something that you experience when you leave your country to go somewhere else, and I like that this was still within the same country. Very interesting, really enjoyed it, would recommend. I read all of those in June, and then in July I didn't read very much at all. So what I read in July, I read Snare by Lilja Sigurdardottir. I hope I've said that right. It's translated by Quentin Bates. I really like this one. It's set in Reykjavik in the city, and it's also partially set in Akranes, which is sort of like northwest from where the city is, and it's a small town, small yeah, small town, and really interesting. We follow a central female-female relationship, and one of the women in the relationship had a male partner and had a child, and is trying to protect her child and trying to look after him, and she kind of gets involved in this drug smuggling ring, and it's about kind of how she gets involved in that drug smuggling ring and the complicated relationships that she has and the kind of danger that she's in on an almost constant basis, you know, going abroad to pick up these drugs from people and then bringing them in, going through customs, and then she has to hand them over to a handler here who is not a good guy. There's a content warning for sexual violence and also just violence against women in general. And the other woman in the relationship is being prosecuted for crimes committed during the financial, or that led up to the financial crisis in 2008. And it's really interesting, especially given that Iceland is one of the only, if not the only, country to prosecute people who committed financial crimes that led to that crisis. So that was really interesting, kind of seeing the, I don't know how much research went into it and like how much kind of the author has spoken to people who had been through that process, but kind of exploring the legal process of that as well. I found that really interesting. I'm really interested in like legal stuff and like crime stuff. So yeah, really enjoyed this. It's also quite like, if you're wanting like a book that you can pick up and put down, you know, like say you don't have very long to read at one time, I would really recommend this because the chapters are very short, so you can see that you can read a little bit and then put it down, which is what helped me as well, because I really wasn't reading much, but I was able to kind of pick this up and put it down as and when I had a bit of time without feeling like I have to read a 30-page chapter. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'll definitely continue with the series, and would recommend it if you're looking for a woman in translation read for next month, for August. Definitely recommend this one. And the final book that I read was Waiting for Superman by Tracie White. I found this really interesting. I wanted to learn more about chronic fatigue, and this is a book about chronic fatigue syndrome, and we follow Whitney, who has chronic fatigue after picking it up from a virus that they contracted while travelling. And very interesting because it's just something that I'm interested in learning more about, and if you have any recommendations for other books about chronic fatigue, I'd be very interested in them. Either memoirs, people's lived experience. I would prefer to read from the perspective of the person experiencing it, rather than, in this case, I was reading from Tracie White's perspective, and Tracie White is like a scientific writer, which is a very interesting perspective and in a way helpful to be detached. And for me as a beginner, a novice in this field of healthcare, field of research, it was good for me, I guess, to kind of get that perspective. But I think that if I was to read something else, I prefer either a personal account or a scientific, purely scientific kind of research kind of based stuff. So if you have any recommendations, I'd be very interested to hear them. But that is everything I read in June and July. So I only read 2 books in July, but I read a lot in June. So I'm looking forward to August. I've shared my August TBR already. I'm taking part in Pixarathon and Women in Translation Month, and expecting to have a good reading month. Very much looking forward to picking up all the books that I was talking about in my TBR. But yeah, that's really everything for this video, so I will leave you there and leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you have a lovely day, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you again in my next one.